The alien warlord saw Earth's last flower. What the human did next changed galactic history, HFY. Part 1, When Beauty Becomes Rebellion. The Prisoner's Gift. The detention center on KRYLL station floated in the void between conquered worlds, a monument to the Dominion's absolute power. Here, in cells carved from asteroid rock and reinforced with quantum fields, the galaxy's most dangerous rebels awaited judgment. Or so the Dominion believed. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in cell 47, her hands still stained with soil that guards had tried unsuccessfully to wash away. She'd been arrested 3 weeks ago on the ruined surface of Earth, caught trying to preserve the last remaining seeds from humanity's botanical archives. The charges were clear: hoarding biological resources, refusing Dominion work assignment, and the most serious offense of all, attempting to preserve Earth culture after the planet had been designated for industrial conversion. Earth was gone now. Not destroyed, but transformed. The blue-green world that had nurtured humanity for millennia had been stripped of its forests, drained of its oceans, and converted into a massive processing facility for the Dominion's war machine. Billions of humans had been relocated to labor colonies across the Empire. Those who resisted, like Sarah, faced execution. But Sarah carried a secret that the Dominion's scanners had failed to detect. Hidden in the lining of her prison uniform, protected by a biodegradable polymer that mimicked human tissue, was a single seed. The last seed of Rosa Terra, a hybrid rose that humanity had engineered over centuries to embody everything beautiful about Earth. It held genetic memory of forgotten gardens, the scent of morning dew on petals, and humanity's desperate hope that beauty could survive even the darkest times. The Warlord's Curiosity. Supreme Commander Thex Kal of the KRYLL Dominion was not known for mercy. His species, the KRYLL, were apex predators who had evolved on a harsh desert world where only the strong survived. They had conquered 47 systems through overwhelming military force and absolute ruthlessness. Compassion was weakness. Beauty was irrelevant. Only power mattered. Thex Kal stood nearly 3 meters tall, his exoskeleton plated with ceremonial armor that bore the marks of countless battles. His 4 eyes, arranged in a diamond pattern on his angular head, could see across multiple spectrums. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction as he reviewed reports of Earth's conversion progress. The planet would produce enough war materials to fuel the Dominion's expansion for decades. He was reviewing prisoner files when something unusual caught his attention. A human scientist, convicted of resource hoarding, had requested an audience. Prisoners never requested audiences. They begged for mercy, they screamed defiance, they broke down in tears. But they never formally requested to speak with the Supreme Commander as if they had something to offer. Intrigued despite himself, Thex Kal approved the meeting. Sarah was brought to the observation deck under heavy guard. The room overlooked the vast emptiness of space, with Earth visible in the distance, a brown, scarred sphere that barely resembled the world she'd known. She stood straight despite her chains, her eyes meeting the warlord's gaze without fear. "You wanted to speak," Thex Kal said in Galactic Standard, his translator rendering his clicks and growls into comprehensible language. "Speak quickly. My time is valuable." "I want to make you an offer," Sarah said calmly. The guards shifted nervously. No prisoner had ever addressed the Supreme Commander with such directness. Thex Kal's mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement. "An offer? You possess nothing. You are nothing. What could you possibly offer me?" Sarah reached slowly into her uniform, moving carefully so the guards wouldn't shoot her. She pulled out the small polymer capsule and held it up to the light. Inside, barely visible, was a tiny seed. "Beauty," she said simply. "The seed that stopped time." Thex Kal stared at the capsule, his multiple eyes focusing on the tiny seed within. "Explain." "This is the last seed of its kind in the entire galaxy," Sarah began. "A rose. A flower that my people spent centuries perfecting. It represents everything we valued: art, patience, hope, the belief that creating beauty is as important as creating power." "Flowers are useless," Thex Kal growled. "They serve no military purpose. They produce no resources. They are biological waste. Then why, Sarah asked quietly, are you still listening? The question hung in the air. Thexgal's guards waited for him to order her execution for such insolence. But the Supreme Commander remained silent, his eyes fixed on the tiny capsule. My species conquered 47 systems, he said finally. We have accumulated wealth beyond measure. We have built an empire that spans light years. Yet when I stand here and look at the stars, I feel. He paused, searching for a word in a language that had no term for what he was experiencing. Empty. Sarah took a step closer, ignoring the guard's warning clicks. That's because conquest without purpose is just destruction. Power without beauty is just violence. Your empire has everything except a reason to exist. And this seed provides meaning? Thexgal's tone was skeptical, but his eyes never left the capsule. No. This seed is just a symbol. But what I'm offering is a choice. You can continue conquering worlds until there's nothing left to conquer, nothing left to destroy. Or you can learn what humans discovered millennia ago, that building something beautiful takes more courage than destroying something complex. Thexgal reached out with one clawed hand, and Sarah placed the capsule in his palm. He held it up to the light, examining the tiny seed that represented the last remnant of Earth's natural beauty. If I plant this seed, he said slowly, if I allow it to grow, I show weakness. My rivals will see mercy where they expect strength. The Dominion's enemies will sense vulnerability. If you plant this seed, Sarah countered, you show vision. You demonstrate that your empire is powerful enough to create, not just destroy. You prove that the Kryll Dominion is building a future, not just burning through the present. The garden's beginning. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. The guards waited for orders. Sarah stood quietly, having played her only card. And Thexgal, Supreme Commander of the Kryll Dominion, holder of 47 conquered worlds, stared at a seed smaller than his smallest claw. When he finally spoke, his words would change galactic history. Human, what do you need to make this seed grow? Sarah's heart, which had been beating frantically, suddenly surged with hope. Soil from Earth, before the conversion. Water, real water, not synthesized. Sunlight, or at least full-spectrum artificial light. And time. At least 60 days from planting to first bloom. And if it grows? If this flower blooms as you claim? Then you'll possess something that no amount of military power can create. You'll have beauty. And every species in the galaxy will know that the Kryll Dominion is capable of nurturing life, not just ending it. Thexgal made a decision that his advisors would call madness, that his rivals would attempt to exploit, and that historians would later identify as the beginning of a new era. Release her, he commanded. Dr. Chen will remain on this station under my personal protection. She will be given whatever resources she needs. And she will teach us how to create beauty. The guard stood frozen in disbelief. Commander, the prisoner is convicted of. I am aware of her crimes, Thexgal interrupted. I am also aware that she possesses knowledge we lack. Knowledge that may prove more valuable than any weapon. He turned back to Sarah. But understand this, human. If you betray this trust, if this is some elaborate deception, I will not simply execute you. I will ensure that every human in every labor colony across my empire suffers for your treachery. I understand, Sarah said, meeting his gaze steadily. But I promise you, Supreme Commander, this rose will bloom. And when it does, you'll understand why humans fought so hard to preserve beauty even when everything else was lost. As Sarah was led away, this time without chains, Thexgal stood alone in the observation deck, holding the tiny capsule up to the starlight. 47 conquered worlds. Infinite military power. Absolute authority over billions of beings. And yet, as he looked at the tiny seed in his palm, the Supreme Commander of the Kryll Dominion felt something he had never experienced in his decades of warfare and conquest. He felt hope. But what neither of them knew was that this single seed would trigger events that would shake the foundations of the Dominion, challenge the very nature of the Kryll species, and ultimately force every civilization in the galaxy to reconsider what it meant to be truly powerful. When gardens grow in iron soil. The watching galaxy. News of the Supreme Commander's decision spread through the Dominion like wildfire through a dead forest. Admiral Krevtok, Thexgal's second-in-command, had called 3 emergency military councils within the first week. Military governors from conquered worlds sent encrypted messages questioning their leaders' sanity. And in the labor colonies where humans toiled under Kryll supervision, whispers began to spread of a human scientist who had somehow convinced the galaxy's most feared warlord to spare her life. Sarah worked in a converted observation room that Thexgal had transformed into a makeshift greenhouse. The space was small, barely 10 meters across, but it had real windows overlooking the stars and adjustable lighting that could simulate Earth's sun. Guards stood outside the door at all times, watching her every movement with suspicious eyes. She'd spent the first 3 days preparing the soil, mixing precious earth dirt that had been retrieved from the planet's surface with nutrients and compounds that would help the seed germinate in the station's artificial environment. Every action was deliberate, careful, almost ritualistic. She worked with the patience that humanity had learned from tending gardens for 10,000 years. Thexgal visited daily, his massive form filling the doorway as he watched her work. At first, he said nothing, simply observing with his 4 eyes. But gradually, he began to ask questions. "Why do you speak to it?" he asked on the 4th day, after catching Sarah whispering to the planted seed. "Because growing things respond to attention," Sarah explained, not pausing in her work. Studies from old Earth showed that plants grew better when people talked to them, played music near them, showed them care. That is illogical. Plants have no consciousness. Maybe not consciousness as you understand it. But they have awareness. They respond to their environment. And intention matters. She looked up at him. "Everything in the universe responds to how it's treated, Commander. Even seeds. Even empires." The first shoot. On day 17, a miracle happened. A tiny green shoot pushed through the soil, reaching toward the light with determination that seemed to defy its microscopic size. Sarah discovered it during her morning check and immediately called for Thexgal. The Supreme Commander arrived within minutes, his ceremonial armor replaced with simpler attire, moving with an urgency that surprised his guards. He entered the greenhouse and stood silently before the small pot, staring at the delicate green stem that had emerged overnight. "It lives," he said, his voice carrying something that might have been wonder. "It lives," Sarah confirmed, unable to keep the emotion from her voice. "This is just the beginning. In another 40 days, if we care for it properly, it will bloom." Thexgal knelt, an action that would have shocked anyone in the Dominion who witnessed it. His face was level with the tiny shoot. "I have commanded armies," he said quietly. "I have destroyed civilizations. I have held the power of life and death over billions. But I have never created anything that grows." "It's not too late to learn," Sarah said gently. That day marked a change in Thexgal's routine. He began spending hours in the greenhouse, learning from Sarah about photosynthesis, about nutrients and growth cycles, about the patient art of nurturing life. His questions became more sophisticated. His interest deepened. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something in the Supreme Commander began to change. The Council's rebellion. Admiral Krevtok could tolerate the situation no longer. He called a secret meeting of the Dominion's High Command, gathering 12 of the most powerful military leaders in a secured chamber far from the Supreme Commander's quarters. "Our leader has been compromised," Krevtok announced. "He spends his days watching a plant grow while our enemies strengthen their defenses. He has granted mercy to a human criminal. He speaks of beauty and creation when he should be planning our next conquest." The assembled commanders clicked their mandibles in agreement. General Thokral, who had led the invasion of the Sigma systems, spoke next. "The Kryll are warriors. We do not garden. We do not show mercy. We do not waste resources on meaningless flowers. Agreed, Krevtok continued. Which is why we must act. For the good of the Dominion, Thexkal must be removed from command. His condition makes him unfit to lead. But before they could vote on this treasonous act, the chamber doors opened. Thexkal stood in the entrance, his 4 eyes gleaming with an intelligence that made even the bravest commander step back. Discussing my condition, Admiral? Thexkal asked calmly. Please, continue. I'm curious to hear your assessment. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Krevtok recovered first, his military training overriding his fear. Commander, we are concerned that you have lost sight of the Dominion's purpose. We exist to conquer, to expand, to dominate. Not to tend gardens. Tell me, Admiral, Thexkal said, moving into the room with deliberate slowness. What do we do after we've conquered the galaxy? When every world flies our flag and every species bows to our power, what then? Then we will have achieved our destiny. And then what? We rule over ash and fear? We become the galaxy's jailers, spending eternity enforcing submission? Thexkal's voice grew stronger. I have seen what we create, Admiral. Ruins. Refugees. Resentment that will fester for generations. We leave nothing behind but hatred. That is the price of power, Krevtok argued. No, Thexkal countered. That is the price of failing to understand what power is for. He activated a holographic display, showing an image of the tiny rose shoot in its pot. The assembled commanders stared at it with confusion and disdain. This human taught me something our species never learned, Thexkal continued. She taught me that creation requires more courage than destruction. That building something beautiful and fragile takes more strength than crushing something complex. That the ultimate expression of power is not how much you can destroy, but how much you can protect. This is weakness. Thokral shouted. This is everything our ancestors rejected. Is it? Thexkal moved to stand directly before the general. Our ancestors survived a brutal desert world by being stronger, faster, more ruthless than anything else on the planet. They conquered their homeworld through violence because violence was the only language their environment understood. But we are not on that desert world anymore. We stand among the stars, surrounded by a galaxy of infinite possibility. And yet we bring nothing but the desert with us. The bloom that changed everything. 6 weeks after planting, on a day when tensions in the Dominion had reached a breaking point, the rose bloomed. Sarah sent word to Thexkal in the middle of a military briefing. He left immediately, ignoring his advisor's protests, and arrived at the greenhouse to find something that defied every military calculation he'd ever made. The flower was perfect. Petals of deep crimson fading to pale pink at the edges, arranged in a spiral pattern that followed mathematical principles humanity had discovered in nature millennia ago. The scent was subtle but profound, carrying memories of Earth's lost gardens in its complex chemical signature. And at its center, pollen gleamed like gold dust, ready to spread life to new generations. Thexkal stood frozen before it, all 4 eyes fixed on the bloom. Sarah waited beside him, understanding that some moments required silence. How long will it last? He finally asked. This bloom? Perhaps 2 weeks. But if we collect the pollen, cultivate new seeds, we can grow more. An entire garden. A legacy. Thexkal reached out carefully, his claw surprisingly gentle as it touched a single petal. The texture was like nothing he'd ever felt, soft but strong, delicate but resilient. All my conquests, he said quietly. 47 worlds. Billions of subjects. Fleets that darken the stars. And yet this single flower is more beautiful than anything my empire has produced. Then change your empire, Sarah said. Make it worthy of this flower. The Supreme Commander stood in silence for a long time, his reflection visible in the window against the backdrop of stars. When he finally spoke, his voice carried absolute certainty. Summon the full council. all governors, all admirals, all commanders. It's time the Dominion learned a new way to be strong. The declaration. The assembly was unprecedented. Every significant leader in the KRYLL Dominion gathered in the Great Hall of KRYLL Station, their holographic presences filling the vast chamber. Rumors had spread wildly. Some believed ThexKAL would announce new conquests. Others feared he had gone mad and would be removed from power. ThexKAL entered carrying a single object, a portable containment case. Inside, visible to all through transparent walls, the rose bloom glowed under perfect lighting. Members of the Dominion, he began. For generations, our species has defined strength as the capacity to destroy, to conquer, to dominate. We have built an empire on the principle that might makes right, that the strong survive and the weak perish. The assembled leaders clicked their mandibles in agreement. But I stand before you today to propose that we have been wrong. Not wrong about our strength, we remain the most formidable military power in the galaxy. Wrong about what we do with that strength. Confused murmurs spread through the hall. ThexKAL raised the container, letting the light catch the rose's petals. This flower was created by humanity over centuries of patient cultivation. It represents everything we KRYLL never valued: beauty, patience, the long view that looks beyond immediate survival. A human scientist risked her life to preserve this single seed when her entire world was being destroyed. He paused, letting his words sink in. And I realized something when I watched this flower grow. We KRYLL are not builders. We are not creators. We take what others have made and claim it as our own. We destroy civilizations and call it conquest. We leave nothing behind but ruins and resentment. What kind of legacy is that? What kind of empire have we built if it produces nothing of value? Commander, Admiral Krevtok interrupted, surely you're not suggesting we abandon our military doctrine? No, Admiral. I'm suggesting we expand it. Our military might remains absolute. But from this day forward, the Dominion will not simply conquer. We will create. We will preserve. We will become an empire that is remembered not just for what we destroyed, but for what we built. He placed the container on a pedestal at the center of the hall. I am declaring a new era for the KRYLL Dominion. Every conquered world will have resources allocated not just for industry, but for restoration. Species we have subjugated will be given opportunities to preserve their cultures, their arts, their beauties. And Earth, the first world to teach us this lesson, will be chosen for our pilot program. We will restore it. Not to its original inhabitants, but as a symbol of what the Dominion can achieve when we choose to build rather than destroy. The hall erupted in chaos. Some commanders roared approval. Others clicked their mandibles in furious dissent. But ThexKAL's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Those who cannot accept this new vision are free to leave my service with honor. But know this, I have seen what we are capable of creating, and I will not return to being merely an engine of destruction. The Dominion will evolve, or it will fall. The choice is yours. The Garden's legacy. 3 years later, Sarah Chen stood in the restored gardens of what had once been devastated Earth. The planet would never be exactly as it was, too much had been lost, too many species had gone extinct. But life had returned. Forests grew where factories had stood. Rivers flowed where processing plants had drained the land dry. And everywhere, roses bloomed. ThexKAL visited regularly, his role as Supreme Commander now balanced with his unexpected position as patron of the Dominion's restoration efforts. He walked beside Sarah through paths lined with flowers, his massive form moving carefully to avoid crushing the delicate blooms. Do you regret it? Sarah asked. Everything you gave up to choose this path? ThexKAL considered the question, his 4 eyes taking in the garden around them. I gave up nothing, he said finally. I gained everything. Power without purpose is just violence waiting to turn on itself. But power used to create, to preserve, to build, that's the kind of strength that lasts beyond any single lifetime. In the distance, they could see the first groups of humans returning to Earth, refugees from labor colonies now coming home to a world that was learning to heal. And scattered throughout the Dominion's empire, on 47 worlds that had known only conquest, new gardens were beginning to grow. The galaxy watched with wonder and suspicion as the feared Kryll Dominion transformed itself. Some species saw opportunity in this change. Others plotted to exploit what they perceived as weakness. But every civilization understood that something fundamental had shifted in the balance of power. The humans who returned to Earth told stories of the day their world died and the day it began to live again. They spoke of a scientist who had risked everything to save a single seed, and a warlord who had learned that true strength meant protecting beauty, not destroying it. And in every garden that bloomed across the Dominion, roses grew, red and pink and gold, their petals soft but resilient, their roots deep in soil that had been soaked with both tears and hope. The galaxy would never be the same. Because one human had dared to offer beauty to a creature of war, and that creature had been brave enough to accept. Some revolutions are fought with weapons. Others are grown from seeds. And sometimes, the most powerful force in the universe is the simple courage to create something beautiful in the face of overwhelming darkness.